Good afternoon, and thank you for joining. We are gathered on the territory of the signatories of Treaty 6, and I acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection to this land. I recognize right now that Albertans are struggling. Higher insurance costs, higher rents and utility bills, higher tuition and school fees, all while Albertans are seeing the lowest wage growth in Canada. But while Alberta families are struggling to make ends meet, friends and insiders of the UCP government are benefiting greatly. Days ago, we learned that the Premier's close friend and former Wildrose Party president, David Yeager, received a $136,000 sole source contract for, quote, professional services. Now, this isn't the first time Albertans have seen a questionable contract for this particular individual. After taking office, Danielle Smith gave David Yeager a $60,000 sole source contract for a report on energy future, a report funded by taxpayers that she is keeping hidden from Albertans. Then after the 2023 election, Danielle Smith and Brian Jean gave David Yeager a $70,000 sole source contract to review the Alberta Energy Regulator, a review that they are also keeping secret from Albertans. Shortly after this, the UCP actually appointed David Yeager to the board of the AER. That is over $200,000 of taxpayer dollars given to a close friend of the Premier without competition or transparency. We don't know what these professional services are that David Yeager offered the Premier's office. And it seems suspicious and rather far-fetched that David Yeager is the only person in all of Alberta who's able to offer these services, along with being the only person in an entire province of energy professionals that could report on energy or investigate the AER, a regulator being sued by Indigenous groups and ranchers in rural Alberta. The UCP did not post an open competition for any of these contracts, but the Premier's former party president is always just a phone call and a big check away from getting contracts. Instead of being transparent with Albertans, instead of focusing on regulatory reform and making the AER a more credible regulator, we are seeing this blatant cronyism. I'd like to pass things over to Samir.
Thank you, Nagwan. In 2014, Danielle Smith made her position on sole source contracts crystal clear when she said, and I quote, "We know what happens when you sole source. Taxpayers get ripped off." End quote. She attacked the PCs for giving out millions in no-bid contracts. And as soon as 8 days before her infamous floor crossing, Danielle Smith and the Wildrose were attacking the PCs for their sole sourcing policy. Her successor as Wildrose leader Brian Jean even went further, vowing to limit what he described as sole source cronyism. Brian Jean went on to campaign to eliminate sole source contracts, guarantee open tendering and billing on all major government procurements and contracts. But since becoming Premier, Danielle Smith has shown that she rejected this previous stance in favor of the full-blown PC cronyism that she once campaigned to oppose. In addition to her former party president getting $266,000, her leadership campaign manager received 2 no-bid contracts worth $142,500. Her mentor, Preston Manning, who organized her floor crossing, received a $253,000 no-bid contract. And a former Conservative staffer got a $50,000 no-bid contract. These 4 examples amount to almost $1 million in taxpayer dollars given to her friends and insiders without open competition in just over 1 year. Simply put, this is Toryland. This is a return to the corruption, cronyism, arrogance, and entitlement that Albertans voted out and that Danielle Smith and Brian Jean campaigned against until they got their hands on power. Thank you, and we're happy to take your questions.
All right, thank you. We'll go to questions in person first.
So I'm wondering what you're asking for here. Do you want the rules on sole source contracts to be tightened up? Do you agree with the previous statements by Brian Jean that they should be done away with altogether? What would you like to see happen around the rules for sole source contracts?
I'd like to see some discipline from the Premier's office is what I'd like to see. I'd like to see some sort of indication that these contracts are legitimate and that their work product that taxpayers paid for is available to us. So that's what I want to see. I don't think it's appropriate for somebody who is the chair of the AER board to be receiving a sole source contract from the Premier's office at the same time. That's not okay.
And what do you want to see in terms of those reports? Like, have you tried filing a Freedom of Information request? Have you motioned for return? Like, how are you trying to get those reports?
We don't know they exist. I mean, it is taxpayer-funded reports. Albertans deserve to see these reports. We deserve to see these reports, especially if they're investigating the Alberta Energy Regulator, especially if they're advising the Premier's office on the future of energy. We're seeing a consistent pattern of interference in public agencies, independent agencies that are supposedly regulating the industry. So we want to see them.
I will check with questions on the line. Just a reminder for those joining us on the phone to use *9, and for those joining us on Zoom to use the raise hand function to get into the question queue. And we'll do one last pass for in person. And with no further questions, we'll wrap today. Thanks, folks.
All right.